Thank you, Katie and Kyle, for inviting us here. Katie and Kyle were at Cornell when I was there, and we didn't know each other, but we recognized each other and befriended each other after school. So it's a nice little lesson for you while you're in this building with all these people. Just um, keep your eyes and ears open because everybody that you meet is very intelligent and into the same things that you are, and who knows where you'll all end up. Um, Kyle Sturgeon really helped us set the exhibit up. And while we were setting up, it reminded me of a former job that I had while I was hoping to start BLDUS. I had friends with a floral designer in DC, and when she had projects, she would need help delivering the flowers that we set up at her place before, getting everything organized with the caterers and embassies and the House office buildings and other important spaces around DC. I would sometimes work with the caterers afterwards, throughout the event, and then take things down afterwards. And it really felt like we came in and catered a party with our office materials for you guys. So that was a kind of fun revisiting of my past. Thanks to Tom too. It's been nice getting to know you and the students for coming and paying us a visit in DC. Um, Quick announcement, we are going to leave here after the talk and head down to Poplar Forest for a 4 o'clock tour that they will host with the head of restoration. They're going to stay open an extra hour for us so that we can make sure we have time and get the attention that we would all deserve. And it's a very special building. We'll be talking about it today. So if you have the time, please join us. It's $12 for students, 26 for faculty. Totally worth it if you haven't been yet. Today, we're going to talk about certified organic architecture, work through some definitions of organic within architecture and also within agriculture. There will be lots of quotes at the beginning. Please be patient with me. I have a 3-year-old, so I have a lot of experience right now reading to people. So I'm going to read through some quotes. They're good quotes, so they're not secondary to what I have to say. And then in the second half of the talk, we'll examine 2 buildings that I think are helpful to expand our understanding of what organic can be. One of them is Poplar Forest, and another is Poplar Grove, my house in DC. So if you visit it, then you can go down and visit Poplar Forest and get the immersive experience of the lecture. And then at the end of the book, at the end of the talk, I'm gonna plug our book, which is for sale in the back for $50. I'm happy to sign them if you'd like. Okay, certified organic architecture. There we go. Quick Google image search of organic architecture. This is what you get. Pretty interesting contrast between the overwhelming spokes building of organic architecture, Falling Water, and these other biomorphic contemporary examples of what people think of now as organic architecture. From Frank Lloyd Wright, and it's important, I'll mention some of the dates, but a lot of these quotes are chronological so that you can see how the term has evolved through society. The ideal of an organic architecture for America is no mere license for doing the thing that you please to do as you please to do it in order to hold up the strange thing when done with the see what I have made of childish pride. The principles underlying the fundamental ideals of an organic architecture are common to all work that ever rang true in the architecture of the world, and free as air to any pair of honest young lungs that will breathe deeply enough. Organic architecture is an architectural form clearly out of the mainstream of contemporary architectural thought, little seen and rarely talked about in the trade publications. Since 1990, there have only been 3 or 4 exhibits and or books about organic architecture. None of them really attempt to redefine it or to examine the historical definition of it. They're all interested in the disciples of Frank Lloyd Wright. So from this 1991 exhibit and book, for some, organic is curved, organic is asymmetrical, organic is natural materials, organic is individualistic, holistic, not mechanical, good. All of these assertions and many more drift vaguely between a specific style and an indefinite concept that takes on many different forms. Organic architecture has roots that extend as far back as the colonial period, when the colonists who migrated to the New World met conditions of site, materials, construction, and function with originality and flexibility, suggesting that organic architecture issues from an attitudinal context, part of which coexists in the notion of Yankee ingenuity. That quote alone is a reason for us to reassess organic architecture when, of course, organic architecture has been happening on this continent for millennia. 1993 issue of AD featured a bunch of different thinkers, including Greg Lynn, in a kind of quirky essay, none of whom are really prominent in architecture these days. 2001 book, New Organic Architecture, proposes that organic architecture includes building as nature, the concept of a continuous present, form follows flow, of the people, of the hill, of the materials, youthful and unexpected, and living music, whatever those mean. And it featured Piano Ando Doshi and a bunch of other kind of random architects. And then the most recent attempt to look at organic architecture, 2006, just featured Right Disciples. Logic, scholarship, or taste, or all of them combined, cannot make organic architecture. They may make logical, scholarly, or tasty buildings, and that is all. And such structures are either dry, chilling, or futile. That's Louis Sullivan, 1901, considered one of the founding thinkers of organic architecture. We'll revisit him. This is the first structure that I designed and built. This was 2003 when I was 15, Hupa for my cousin. And I'd like to sort of argue today that this is more organic, more in line with the idea of organic architecture than many of these biophilic, contemporary, parametric buildings. It's a little word map of the relationships between architecture, agriculture, and food. A lot of overlap here. We could spend another few months trying to really flesh this out and map it out, but you kind of get the picture. An organic farm, properly speaking, is not one that uses certain methods and substances and avoids others. It is a farm whose structure is formed in imitation of the structure of a natural system that has the integrity, the independence, and the benign dependence of an organism. And that's Wendell Berry, amazing thinker about agriculture and land use from Kentucky. And so I'm not going to really dive deep into the history of organic agriculture, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an appetizer. So Sir Albert Howard, Lady Edith Balfour, Walter James, the Lord Northbourne, the clairvoyant Rudolf Steiner, who we'll get back to later on in this presentation, talk about his architecture. Masanobu Fukuoka, which takes us to organic architecture today, which has really hit the mainstream, both within the federal government, governance regulations, and commercially with places like Sweet Green that are very popular because of their actual and alleged ties to farms and organic food and freshness. And then most of the top restaurants in the world these days, the top end of cuisine is about farm to table, organic food, and sort of trying to find your own understanding of the landscape, of place, of earth through food. American architecture has always had a blurred relationship between architecture and agriculture, and we need to look no further than Monticello to see that that's the case. Monticello is really, when it was operational, a laboratory through which potentially commercially viable agricultural products came from around the world, flowed into Monticello, and then back out into the region and the country where Jefferson shared these potential crops with friends to see if they could be commercially viable. So things like corn, he thought that sugar maple would be our staple crop throughout the country to produce our sugar, not corn. Some of them were more successful than others. Andrea Wolf wrote a wonderful book, 2011, called The Founding Gardeners, that explored the relationship between farming and the founding fathers. And she describes James Madison's speech to the Alabama Agricultural Society in 1818. Madison's speech was a lament of all that was wrong with American agriculture, as well as a catalog of measures that could rectify the problems. More importantly, it was a call for change and an explanation of what Madison called the symmetry of nature, the interrelationship between Earth and mankind. Sullivan, Wright, Steiner, and Alto are typically thought of as the founders of the organic architecture movement. I would argue that it runs deeper and is an older strain of thought within American architecture. Frank Furness didn't write about organic architecture, but certainly pursued the idea both in decoration and in the sense that we typically think of now, a sort of connection to nature, but also in the sense that Sullivan and Wright talk about as one single organism, the building being an organism. So we see masonry, brick, a metal truss, all kinds of decorations, cable ties, and they all come together to read as a singular building. We can go back further than Furness. A.J. Downing, 1853, unity is the highest idea of quality of abstract beauty, for it comprehends, includes, and governs all the others. It is the predominance of one single feeling, one soul, one mind in every portion, so that whether of the simplest or the most complicated form, the same spirit is recognized throughout the whole. And if you go through drawings that Downing made with A.J. Davis and other architectural illustrators and collaborators, you see that the houses are almost always framed by a landscape. That's a pretty consistent feature throughout his career. Back to Louis Sullivan, who most people assume is the founder, and really he was the first to use the term organic frequently. The details are not the same as the parts and the mass. They cannot be, but they can be and should be similar to the parts and to the mass because its significance reverts to the organic quality, which I mentioned to you. There is no limit to the subdividability of organic thinking. Consequently, each part must so clearly express its function that the function can be read throughout the part. But you might add that if the work is to be organic, the function of the part must have the same quality as the function of the whole. And the parts of themselves and by themselves must have the quality of the mass, must partake of its identity. Rudolf Steiner, 1921, these are his two institutes that he designed and built to embody organic architecture. The first wooden version burned down. He rebuilt in a concrete version, and you can see the sort of stylistic change required because of the new material. In no way have we sought to imitate any kind of organism naturalistically here. Rather, what we tried to do is to enter empathetically into the organic creative principle of nature herself. The whole building, everything about the architecture has been conceived within the context of the whole. Alvarado quote from a 1960 Vincent Scully book called Alvarado. Variety and growth, reminiscent of natural organic life, are the very essence of architecture. I would like to say that this is ultimately the only true style in architecture. From a 1984 book about Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian houses, John Sargent says, Wright endowed the word organic with such cultural meaning that the remainder of this book would be required to attempt a whole definition. Usonia was his name for the reformed American society that he tried for the last 25 years of his life to bring about. Organic referred to the way in which this change was going to occur. Ultimately, both spring from Wright's deep conviction that a culture or an individual should proceed integrally from its core or roots, out of the ground and into the light. Frank Lloyd Wright would be very upset if we use other people to define his concepts. So I'll go through a few of his own quotes, and these are in chronological order so you can see how he refined his position on organic architecture. 1908, in the hope that someday America may live her own life in her own buildings in her own way, I have tried to establish organic integrity to begin with, forming the basis for the subsequent working out of a significant grammatical expression and making the whole, as nearly as I could, consistent. In seeking now a reasonably solid grasp on the value of the word organic, we should at the beginning fix in mind the values of the correlated words: organism, structure, function, growth, development, form. 1914, I still believe that the ideal of an organic architecture forms the origin and the source, the strength, and fundamentally the significance of everything ever worthy of the name architecture. By organic architecture, I mean an architecture that develops from within outward, in harmony with the conditions of its being, as distinguished from one that is applied from without. 1935, in an organic architecture, the ground itself predetermines all features. The climate modifies them. Available means limit them. Function shapes them. 1939, yet in this modern era, art, science, and religion, these three will unite and be one. Unity achieved with organic architecture as center. Where the periphery of that circle will lie, who may say? Organic is the word which we should apply to this new architecture. So here I stand before you preaching organic architecture, declaring organic architecture to be the modern ideal and the teaching so much needed if we are to see the whole of life, holding no traditions essential to the great tradition. 1954, this architecture we call organic is an architecture upon which true American society will eventually be based if we survive at all, upon and within which the common man is given freedom to realize his potentialities as an individual, himself unique, creative, and free. 1957, for 500 years, what we call architecture has been phony, in the sense that it was not innate, wasn't organic, didn't have the character of nature. Notice he doesn't say before 500 years, he's talking about colonialism. 1960, site, structure, furnishing, decoration too, planting as well. All these become one in organic architecture. Henry Russell Hitchcock, assessing the influence of Wright on the architecture scene. Wright's influence was protean on the international scene. From the day when the German publisher Wasmuth first made Wright's work available to Europeans, this was true, down to the time 25 years ago when the Italian architect, critic, and historian Bruno Zevi tried to invert chronology so that Wright's Architectura Organica might seem to have succeeded rather than preceded the international style of the second generation of modern architects. Here's Bruno Zevi finally admitting to the power of organic architecture. Organic architecture satisfies more complex needs and functions than functionalist architecture. It is functional not only in techniques and utility, but also in terms of human psychology. The organic movement is not merely a current in taste, but is aimed at creating spaces which are not only beautiful in themselves, but represent the organic life of the people who live in them. And so that sort of takes us to the point where all of these 1990s, 2000s exhibitions and books get to, which is Wright disciples like Lautner and Ife Jones and Bruce Goff and Paolo Soleri. But there is another strain of organic architecture that is hiding behind a different name, and took me a while to figure this one out. Kenneth Frampton is sneaky, but his critical regionalism is really a redefinition of organic architecture. The fundamental strategy of critical regionalism is to mediate the impact of universal civilization with elements derived indirectly from the peculiarities of a particular place. It may find its governing inspiration in such things as the range and quality of local life, or in a tectonic derived from a peculiar structural mode, or in the topography of a given site. So essentially organic light or something. This is in relation to a book that you wrote about North American architects, surprise, surprise. At the risk of oversimplifying, I would like to suggest that despite fundamental differences, all of these practices manifest a common concern for emphasizing the following expressive tropes, as these may be found throughout their work, namely landscape, material, structure, craft, space, and light. What a discovery he made. Today, many contemporary practices are teaching out various threads of organic architecture without calling it such. And I think doing an amazing job. I love all of these practices, and together they sort of combine to help define a contemporary organic architecture. There are also architects living organic architecture. both historically and in contemporary practice. So we have the tradition of Monticello and Taliesin, sort of living laboratories exploring the relationship between agriculture and architecture. We also have the Flora development by David Samala in Duluth, and the Showback development by McKay Lyons Sweet Apple up in Nova Scotia. I've been to Monticello, Taliesin, and Fleur. Fleur was my favorite. So if you're thinking about taking a pilgrimage to go see Alto or the Corbusier, you might want to also think about going up to Duluth, Minnesota, visiting the nicest architect you will ever meet, and seeing some spectacular buildings that he designed that he manages to keep very low profile. This is his house, and these are different houses that he's developed and sold off to neighbors nearby him. Huge rocks and boulders on the site that made the site unwanted for a long time. It's in a kind of middle class neighborhood, but looks over Duluth, spectacular. And again, he's as nice as it gets. We kind of have our own version of this. Instead of exploring agriculture, we're exploring forestry, which in our city is an urban forest. So my house here, my partner Jack's house here, you see the back of both of them because both of our houses face the Capitol. And you can see in these Google Earth images the tree canopy. Jack's wife is a UVA grad landscape architect, and she works for Casey Trees, which is the nonprofit that manages the tree canopy in DC. They have a fantastic roof garden on their house now. So they're really living a productive agricultural life within the city. The fronts of our houses, which again, both face west. Our practice has become known for the materials that we use and that we advocate for. Sometimes we have clients that ask us if we ever get bored of using wood. No, we don't. And it's not that simple. These images that look like lots of wood are actually lots of different types of wood. Because we have advanced sourcing networks these days, we are able to pull in various wood species, each performing a specific function, and each having its own unique characteristics, pros and cons, and when combined in the correct way can lead to very durable, livable, easy to build buildings. So I'm gonna hand the mic over for a second to our first intern, Hardy Evo. He is a student currently at Yale University, and I think his biography says a lot about what we're looking at here. He grew up in agriculture, restaurants, farming, and has gotten into architecture since then. And I would imagine there are other people here at UVA that have a similar type of background, and I hope that this becomes more and more common. Hardy put together the drawings that are on exhibit this summer. So he's gonna give us a few insights about his experience putting them together, and then we will look at the two houses.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. As Andy said, I grew up working in restaurants. A lot of my family are farmers, and so that's part of my background. And then now interested in architecture, and I think it's really interesting, sort of like the parallels that can be drawn, especially in this case with sort of the sourcing of ingredients in restaurants and in food, and sourcing of materials for architecture, both sort of being the respective building blocks of their fields. And so with these drawings, we're calling them wood salads, sort of taking in all these ingredients and making drawings like this, where we are taking these buildings, which are 4 specific BLDUS buildings, breaking them apart into their sort of components, tossing them like a salad, color coding them, and then arranging them in these sort of easily digestible forms. So within this, you can see that the yellow is bamboo, the dark green is pine, this is black locust, or no, that's oak, this is black locust. But these sort of drawings allow us to get a better sense of the materials, especially with the varieties of wood being used. It can be hard to differentiate them and identify them. So this simplifies, sort of strips away all that texture and makes it easier to see. I think the real value of these drawings is with the key, you can see what materials are being used, but just at a glance, you can get a sense of how the house works. For example, this house right here, grass house, uses a wide variety of natural materials, and that's evident by its sort of vibrant, colorful drawing. Whereas this house, stick house, is made of pine and cedar, and it's much more monochrome. It's also interesting. This is grass house. This is stick house. They actually take up the same footprint, 20 by 20 by 12 feet, and yet within that, there's a rich diversity of material in one and less in the other. But it's hard to tell just from this because wood is sort of treated here. It's been charred, and on one side it's charred cypress, on one side it's charred cedar. So it's useful to have these drawings to tell. And our sort of future plan is to expand these sort of drawings to a wider set of sort of timber-focused American homes, going back to very early homes from 17th century New England. This is the Hoxie House in Sandwich and the House of Seven Gables in Salem, both made almost entirely of old-growth pine, which was abundant and local at the time. And then moving on to poplar forest, which has a lot of poplar, unsurprisingly, and then the Pope Lady House by Franklin Wright, which is almost entirely cypress, and then things like Sea Ranch, which are local Douglas fir, redwood, and cedar. And then some more other ones. So Gamble House is actually probably the most wood diverse house we're looking at. It's got a lot of sort of more common American woods, but also supported woods such as mahogany and teak. Brings into questions about whether a house is local, what it's using, and then two more recent homes. This is Sal Mella, who Andy presented, Rob Admonson House, which utilizes like Rich Light, which is paper product, so utilizing new materials, and then Bates Mossy's Northwest Harbor House, which again quite simple, only using cedar. And the idea is to sort of expand the drawing set and have more insights as to locality, food, wood, materiality, things like that. I'll hand it back to Ed.
Thank you. So ultimately, one is forced to draw the conclusion that organic agriculture and architecture remains as firmly rooted in the material world as conventional or chemical agriculture. It is simply a matter of choosing more benign material substances to achieve one's goals of fertility and of avoiding the use of the kind of toxic materials that form much of the basis of chemical agriculture in today's world. Organic agriculture often must define itself by what it avoids or does not use. That's Rudolf Steiner in 1912 and Spiritual Beings. And we're guilty of this as well. We use these two images frequently to describe the types of products that we avoid or the type of waste that we avoid. And then the type of off-gassing we also like to avoid. We prioritize the health of the inhabitants, and that means avoiding red-listed products, avoiding, not going towards. What is it that sets this spiritual form of biodynamic agriculture apart from both organic and conventional chemical agriculture? One significant factor is that biodynamic agriculture recognizes our planet Earth as a living being within a solar system and a greater universe that possesses the quality of life as well. In recognizing the living quality of the Earth, biodynamics also attempts to take into account the effects that other living members of our solar system and the entire living cosmos have upon the Earth. Bruno Zevi, 1950, the organic architect concentrates upon the structure, and he regards it not merely from a technical point of view, but as the complex of all the human activities and feelings of the people who will use it. Architecture is organic when the spatial arrangement of rooms, house, and city is planned for human happiness, material, psychological, and spiritual. The organic is based, therefore, on a social idea and not on a figurative idea. We can only call architecture organic when it aims at being human before it is humanist. These are many of the thinkers that we've discussed today. I probably don't need to point out to you that it's a very limited demographic. We are guilty of remaining within that limited demographic, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because I hope that other demographics, pick this concept up and expand upon what the definition of organic can be today. And yet, I will now talk about the House of White-Salem. Today, around the circumference of architectural thought, basic errors still exist concerning the new concept I have stated of the good old third dimension, usually seen as thickness, weight, a solid, sublimated by organic architecture. It is interpreted as depth. The depth dimension, really a fourth now, the sense of space. Perhaps the fourth as sought by the European cubists, the element we call space given a new concept. Witness organic architecture. That's Frank Lloyd Wright, and he's describing a concept of space that I think was first brought to the North American continent in poplar forests. So the concept of space being European, Western, imported here by colonists and really refined for the first time by Thomas Jefferson at Poplar Forest. You can see the chronological order of some of Jefferson's designs. We start out more compositional, more derivative of Palladio, and he really finds his groove after in the 1800s, where he is looking at buildings that are unified and single organisms. And I haven't really found conclusive proof, but I think that he came across many of these ideas when he was living in Paris and traveling around Europe, meeting different European thinkers. Who knows what type of art he saw while he was there? He has extensive journals, but of course they don't cover everything. So here you see essentially the plan of Poplar Forest in 1536 painting. We know that he bumped shoulders with many French intellectuals, some of whom were probably some of these French utopian architects, including Boulay and Ledoux, who were really thinking about very progressive macro scale understandings of architecture. So placing the human and architecture within the larger cosmos. And when you see these and you know that they produced these a few years before Jefferson got over to France, it starts to sort of come together. Jefferson got back from Europe and he was sketching incessantly these centrally focused shapes, or the way that you can arrive at shapes, obsessed with the octagon, obsessed with the circle, with building circles, with centrality. And finally, after many, many iterations of designs for Poplar Forest, he arrived at what I think is a packaged 20 by 20 by 20 space, packaged by the house around it. And so if you come today, we'll be able to see that 20 by 20 by 20 space, which again, I think is the very first space that touched the North American continent. This is an original site plan sketch by Jefferson. And there's the space brought back to its potentially original glory. And we can see it compared to a Boulay drawing. And I think that the similarities are pretty apparent. Different scale, but they're there. So Poplar Forest is not terribly well known, but it is terribly important, I think, to the history of American architecture. And people have been influenced deeply by it. Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple, Lucan's Exeter Library, unavoidable, and us as well. That's why we called our house Poplar Grove. The chamfered corners were a necessity of the tight alley. And so we arrive at the octagon. We didn't have the space for 20 by 20 by 20 cube in the middle, but we do have an 11 by 11 by 11. So it's the little version. The house is known for its materiality. That's how writers have written about it, and it's been published. We live it as a device to allow us to connect with the sun and the moon and the stars and the elements. So the arrangement of the floor plan is such that as we move through the house throughout the day, getting ready in the morning for breakfast, doing a little bit of play in the morning, my wife working from home, working in the afternoon with the nice afternoon sunlight, and then finally we have a balcony up in the top northwest corner where we catch the last rays of sun. And then the skylights, they're a significant feature of the house. They're necessary because these alley lots don't get much privacy. People can walk right up against the houses. There's no yard to buffer them. So we have shut out the large sliding glass doors on the ground floor with the fence, which lets light come in but allows us to retain privacy, blocks views. And we have this 3x3 grid of skylights that keep us connected to the sky all day, all night, every day, every night. The skylights were pretty simple to put together, but they've had a huge impact. We have blinds on them now, remote control shades, so we really get to play with how light is filtered in. Sometimes we can just close all of them, keep one open them in different patterns. Here's what we do when it's hot out and we have the sort of edges of the skylights that are blocked from direct southern exposure open while blocking out the rest of southern exposure. I tried to find an image that I've taken a few times of the moon seen through the skylights. I'm very upset that I couldn't find that, but it's an amazing experience. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, go downstairs and realize it's pouring light down into the house and it's moonlight. It's pretty phenomenal. And when it snows, we get to experience it. It rains. When people set off illegal fireworks in our alley, you see them through our skylights. Here's the house as it appears from the neighboring houses. Alley houses in DC all have to they're limited to a 20-foot height limit, so all of the houses around the block are always smaller. We get more lot occupancy, so we have short, squat buildings, but it means that our neighbors are looking down onto our houses. So we have to be aware of that when trying to keep privacy. We actually have an outdoor shower right in here, and we made sure that the height of the fence prevented people from looking down into the shower. And of course, the materiality is a significant component of the house. I'm underplaying it now for this talk, but we spent a lot of time looking for the right materials. This was built during COVID, so Adam and I spent a lot of time building it. We had one phenomenal carpenter who led everything, and we were essentially his assistants for a year, working in the 100-degree summer days. And so we could go through, and pick out all the different types of wood, but you can look at the diagram upstairs, and then I won't have to describe it to you. The concrete slab was colored to resonate with the Tennessee pink marble pavers that we dumpster dove to claim from the decladding of the National Air and Space Museum. That was my favorite building growing up, so to be able to have pieces of that building sort of means the world to me. Our countertops and backsplashes and things are all meant to complement those Tennessee pink marble pavers. We use tool poplar bark on the exterior, so poplar is used throughout for structural elements, which it's not typically used for because it checks so badly. It is typically used for plywood, so we have some really beautiful plywood with nice grain to it. The skylights allow for terrific light. The mesh net enhances that light because it's white. That was an unexpected feature, but without it, it would be a little darker in there. So we are, like sailors, we are constantly fiddling with the skylights, closing them to get my son to go to bed before the sun goes down, opening them to, wake up in the morning. And we are always close to nature. Most of this wood came from Martin's Native Lumber in Harrisonburg, brought on a truck by the people who cut it. So it was pretty wonderful. And in all of our buildings, we try to provide illumination somewhere on the exterior that allows for the building to feel like it's living, like it's breathing. If you've been to Frank Lloyd Wright houses, you know that he often designed lights throughout the houses. He didn't have LED strip lights. I would love to see what he does with cheap LED strip lights because the potential is phenomenal. And so this brings us to our book, Home on Earth. This is Earth. Trying to reframe how people understand organic architecture, natural materials. I think Yana once said, When people think of natural materials, there's this sort of eco attitude from the 70s that a lot of people still have, and we would certainly like to combat that and allow people to see the connections between organic architecture and the farm to table movement that they pay so much to be a part of. The cover of the book is not some funky shape, it's the space between two stars, and that sort of our ethos, working in Washington, D.C., among all these big monuments, working on Earth, among all these various stars that have significant impacts on the Earth. This is the actual distance told between Earth and the Moon. We try to source our materials as locally as possible and use local materials as much as possible, but we're also okay bringing in high-performing materials from relatively far away, as long as their useful lifespan counteracts the carbon footprint of the shipping of the materials. So we would love for bamboo to be produced in the US. I could give you a whole lecture on why that's difficult to make happen. Adam did his entire thesis on cork's presence in the United States and our attempts during World War II to grow cork when the Germans were torpedoing our cork shipments because we made life jackets and helmets out of them. In response, we invented the foam industry and the plastic industry. That was a replacement to cork, so most of the things that foam can do in buildings now, cork could do, and some other materials. And I'll just give a real quick plea. The place that we still need foam in houses, whether it's a $10 million house or a $500,000 house, is around the windows. We all use these dumb Home Depot cans of foam to spray around the windows and seal them in, and there isn't a code-compliant alternative. I'm sure some chemists can find a way to use mycelium to do this. We haven't really found a good way to bring mycelium into the built environment. When you see architects working with mycelium, it's usually for pretty lampshades or schools or something. I would love to be able to not use these cans of foam and to instead replace it with mycelium, because mycelium can be as local as possible. We practice in the Mid-Atlantic region, and that allows us to focus on climates and landscapes that we're familiar with and to visit all of the material suppliers, meet the people who manufacture the materials, see them as they're extracted out of the ground. Importantly, we drive around the areas where these materials are made and we get a feel for how the community has received them. A good example of this is rock wool, which is promoted as sustainable. The Sustainable Architecture Group in DC just had a lunch and learn about the sustainable product of rock wool. It's sort of like BP with their green logo. If you drive around rock wool factories, you see signs in all the homeowners' yards, no rock wool, because it's a terrible pollutant in the local areas that it's made. And you would never be able to know that because the rock wool industry sort of has a stranglehold on its identity. So it's very important to us to visit the places that we get our materials, including the cork in Portugal, the bamboo down in South and Central America, etc. We interpret the sites that we work at with these natural materials. And in DC, that means that every site is exceptionally significant. DC to us is a chessboard, 10 by 10 mile grid with mile markers at each mile along the boundary. It's such an amazing, advanced way of laying out a city. And it was laid out in the 1790s. Many American architects, some of the best, you'd be surprised, still don't know that DC is a diamond. It's a little disturbing, but we love to work within this essentially chessboard. And rather than try to sort of think that we know better than the amazing founding father surveyors, they were all surveyors, or Benjamin Banneker, who was a great surveyor, but also the best astrologer in North America at the time that he helped L'Enfant lay the city out. Instead of thinking that they had alignment fails, we patiently try to learn about why alignments are slightly tweaked to correspond to significant dates. So on a very particular date, important to Freemasons, the sun aligns with the Washington Monument, and the tip of the monument touches the front steps of the Capitol, which is higher than where I was last take this photo from, which is why the sun isn't directly on top of the monument. Have to get some more privileged access during a different administration. But you can see one of the other nice alignments, which is when the sun sets over now the Treasury Department, because Andrew Jackson built the Treasury Department in front of the White House, but it was intended for you to be able to see the sun setting over the White House from the Capitol. And so there are countless alignments and significant dates, and this is what Rudolf Steiner was getting at in terms of correlating agriculture and architecture with the cosmos. You do that through calendars. Calendars are how we relate to the cycles of the planets and the stars. We therefore treat our sites with reverence and respect. It's one of the reasons we like to build our own buildings. One of my favorite architects, Tamaki Uno, talks about the balance between freedom and responsibility. Only with the acceptance of responsibility do you have true design freedom. And so when we build with developers, even when they're great developers and they have the best of intentions, the market is still pushing many of their decisions, and we might get to a 90 to 95% correct design. But for us, we want to get to 100, and that means going out and doing a lot of the work ourselves. This is Adam up here. Right before you bash this head out. And even, we've had a lot of injuries. Black locust is really heavy, really hard, really difficult to work with. I have cuts all over my hands from it. This is our carpenter, Ruben Lopez. He's the best in DC. And he's built all of our best projects. And so we're talking about materiality a lot, but to us, space is still primary. So we try to make spaces that connect you to nature despite being in the middle of the city, whether that be through the materiality or through a relationship to the elements, to light, to the plants and the stars. Here's a few more shots of the materiality, our architecture. We have tried to explore these ideas further with the book. So these are recipes in various forms. We have text-based recipes that are intended for non-architects. They read like grandma's recipes. So instead of having really hyper-specific, quantified carbon capture, which I love to read about in other publications, we tried to be a little more loose with it. So you could draw from these material combinations without thinking that they are prescriptive. They're not prescriptive, they're recipes. We explore the relationship between our buildings and this chessboard that I described. The book is 8 by 8 inches, which is 20 by 20 centimeters. So you can use that as a model of DC. And then this map is in there full size, so it's almost to a scale. And then we try to locate many of our projects at the end of the book within this landscape of DC through some simple sketches. A quick promotion for the book. There are 6 unbuilt projects that are expressed through models and through sketches. So we use food items to create these models. This is a house that's in Anacostia, near Anacostia, and it's designed for a hillside, didn't get built here on a hill of kale. A really simple, nice house stuck into the side of a triangular parcel. You can see why it hasn't been built on before. And this would be a pretty small house. The market in Anacostia wasn't able to support it. Cesson students will understand why that is. Many layers of reasons. And for all of the projects, we have these sketches. These are another form of recipe. These are sketches mostly that Jack, my partner, has done, and many of his sketchbooks are up on the wall. I sketch too, but he's phenomenal, so we like to look at his. I like to look at his. I'm a fan, as big a fan of his as anyone. And yeah, so you can kind of trace the evolution of the idea for each of the houses. And so the zoomed out conceptual sketches are a type of recipe. Our detailed sketches are also a type of recipe. And those are the recipes for the sort of advanced architects that non-architects aren't really going to care much about, but really tell how the materials, the ingredients get combined together. So just a few spreads of the book to give you an idea of what's in there. Some of you may have flipped through it. We have photographs, sketches, built work. We also explore combinations of our material samples. My first job in an architecture office with Corcoran and Oda Architects in Atlanta was to design for them a mail-ordered material library for their basement. So they basically put me in their basement for a month or two and asked me to design this thing as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and then put it together. And so that was my first time dealing with material samples. I then worked at some of the offices that Katie mentioned, and that included OMA. It was depressing to see at each of these exceptional world-class firms the same material samples as were in Corcoran and Oda's office. I love Michael Corcoran. They do retirement homes. So for OMA and Tiger Curry and Fantastic Norway to be sourcing the same type of materials globally as this Atlanta office is disturbing. So here we explore how we can reframe some of these samples to give them more dignity and to make them feel as special as we think they are. And we're always getting new samples, always interested. We just got some sustainable terrazzo samples in the mail made with recycled stone that are phenomenal, and trying to find a way to work with, I think they're called coverings ink, to use those in some of our projects. And then a few more unbuilt projects that are explored through models, sketches. So that is the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you for your attention.